happy Holy Week to you, and I'm excited to talk with you today. I've been thinking about this in the course of the last week or so in relation to peace in the midst of turmoil. Like, what does that mean? Well, let me just float this past you and just think about this for your consideration. When Jesus came into Jerusalem for Holy Week, he kind of upended the apple cart, right? He created some turmoil to the status quo. The status quo was the Roman leaders, occupying, controlling Jerusalem. The religious leaders, Jewish leaders, Sadducees, Pharisees, scribes, all those guys, they had their established positions. But Jesus kind of upended the apple cart. And when he came into Jerusalem on Triumphant Sunday, Hosanna, Palm Sunday, all of that, he kind of turned things upside down. Because when he walked into Jerusalem, he didn't really walk. He rode on a donkey. But when he came into Jerusalem, he went into the temple and turned everything upside down. He created a boatload of turmoil. Turmoil for the status quo, for the religious leaders, for the day-to-day routine operations of what was happening in Jerusalem. And there were some struggles. Maybe the normal people, regular, just average status quo, everyday Joe, thought this was great. But I suspect that there were a few people that said, hey, what are you doing? What the heck? And so maybe you feel that way today. Maybe you feel like, life is not status quo. Maybe it's been upended. Maybe COVID turned your world upside down. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe in this Holy Week, you're trying to find some semblance of stability. And what I'd like to propose to you is that Jesus is our Prince of Peace. And I say that because I think in our world that we live in, there's a lot of upheaval. Political upheaval, status quo upheaval, healthcare upheaval, church upheaval. What are we doing? Where are we going? I think there's just a lot of upheaval. And you might have experienced this in your financial life. You might have experienced this in your profession. You might have experienced this in your family dynamics, like some of this instability and uncertainty, unpredictability, what's going on in the future. And I get it. I think that's really something that we have to sit with and think about. At the same time, I would say to you that Jesus is our Prince of Peace. And even though he came into Jerusalem on Holy Week, Palm Sunday, turned everything upside down, he also is the central essence of peace. And I say this because of what he said in John 14:27, because he said to his disciples, and this is basically on Maundy, Thursday, at the Last Supper, he said to his disciples, to his followers, it would be you and me, my peace I leave with you, not as the world gives, but as I give to you. So I'm going to talk about peace, because peace is a big deal. And I think sometimes we have the idea that peace is the absence of conflict, the absence of tension, stress, and struggle. But when Jesus came into Jerusalem, he didn't necessarily come in with all kinds of status quo peace, validating what was already in existence. He completely flipped Jerusalem inside out, upside down. But I think with that said, when Jesus says, I am the Prince of Peace, I think in that contrast dichotomy, there's something for us to think about and to consider. Because I think that the world that we live in has all kinds of upheaval, instability, all kinds of absence of peace. If you read the news, whether it's a local news, is Governor Polis going to lift the mask mandate or not? What does that mean? What's happening with COVID, our numbers here in Colorado, what's going on. Not just, okay, so let's take it away from Denver. Let's move it into the United States, what's happening with President Biden, what's going on shoot, how about the Boulder shooting last week? I mean, we got all kinds of uncertainty and what's happening in the future. But Jesus steps into that because I think it was the same scenario in some respects in Jerusalem for Holy Week. What's going on? Where are we going? What's happening? All kinds of instability because of the Roman occupation, the tension with the Jewish leaders and Roman occupation in Jerusalem, and Pilate versus the high priest, yada, yada. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons and explanations for the absence of peace. But I appreciate what Jesus says to us in John 14:27. My peace I leave with you, not as the world gives, but as I give to you. If we try and find peace like the world gives to us, it's going to be kind of futile. It's going to be a chasing after the wind, a pursuit of the mirage, elusive, doesn't happen. And I like what Jesus says at the end of this verse, because he says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't let your hearts be fearful. And maybe as you're watching this, maybe you've been anxious. These are the same synonyms in essence, troubled and fearful, synonyms for anxious, uncertain, worried, stressed out. And that seems to be pretty common in our world. I think that it's easy for you and me to find ourselves stressed out, anxious, uncertain, worried. What's going to happen? What's not going to happen? Where are we going to go? What's going to happen with job, economy, COVID, what's going on in the future? These are all like normal status quo questions for us. But Jesus says to us, in the midst of all that uncertainty, in the midst of the anxiety and the worry, he says to us, don't let your hearts be troubled, and don't be fearful. You know me and my Greek stuff, right? So I went and I looked at the words troubled and fearful. And these words, troubled, means to stir up, to stir the pot. And the word fearful, it's an interesting word because it's not the typical phobia that we have, from the Greek, but it means to have this idea of timidity, to tremble, and to be kind of, anxious. And Jesus says to us, actually it's a command, don't. It's an imperative. Don't be troubled. Don't be fearful. So, you hear those words, and as a close follower of Jesus, I want to make those reality in my life. But I struggle. Maybe you do too. To hear it and say, okay, don't do that. But then how? How do we not be troubled and fearful? And I want to give you kind of some action points for that. And it's related to this idea of peace and what Jesus' peace does for us. So when you think of peace, it's an interesting word. In the Latin, we get it from pax, it means to have a pact or to have an agreement. But in the Greek, it's the word eirene. You might know a woman whose name is Irene. That's the origin of the word peace. And in Hebrew, it's the word shalom. Shalom and Irene, Greek and Hebrew, have this idea of wholeness, well-being, and completeness. And so I think it's important for us to consider, if we're looking for peace, sometimes I think we look for it on the outside. We look for the absence of conflict. We look for things to be smooth and without being ruffled or being, unraveled. But I want you to consider as well that peace isn't necessarily an external existence, because what's on the outside of us kind of undulates, right? I mean, we might have conflicts, we might have discussions, debates, disagreements, uncertainty, fear. There's all kinds of things externally that cause us to be unpeaceful, to have an absence of peace. But I like what Jesus says, and there's two verses I want us to think about as you watch today. Number one, is the first verse in Philippians 4, verse 7, because this is what peace, Jesus' peace, does for us. Philippians 4, verse 7, it says, and let the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. So when we think about the world that we live in and all the upheaval, uncertainty, worry, stress, anxiety, the absence of peace, Jesus' peace will guard. It's an interesting word in the Greek because it's the word, and I'm going to cheat and look real closely here, phroeo. You're like, phroeo, that's the word in the Greek. And it literally means to stand guard, to protect, to vigilantly be in security of peace. And so Jesus' peace stands guard in your heart and your mind. I think this is really important for us to consider, because if we let all the world around us and conflict and tension, upheaval, all that stuff, if we let that come into our souls, then we're not letting the peace of Jesus guard, to stand in security. Like, you think about a security guard. A security guard says, hey, you can't come in here. Hey, you're not welcome. Hey, you have to have the right, credentials to get in here, to have access. And Jesus' peace does that for us. It provides a protection, a vigilance for our heart and our mind. So regardless of what's happening around us, Jesus' peace can say, no, you're not welcome to all of that anxiety and the worry, stress, all that stuff, fear. It's not welcome. And I wanted to just encourage you today that we agree with Jesus' peace guarding our heart and our mind. But I also want to bring your attention to one more word in the Greek, one more action of Jesus' peace. And this is in Colossians 3:15. And it's very interesting because it says, let the peace of Christ rule, R-U-L-E, rule in your hearts. And this is the Greek word brabeo. You're like, woof, that's a weird word. I agree. But this word brabeo is a little bit different than guarding because it has the idea of being an umpire or a referee. And I think about this because a referee says, hey, these are the parameters, or an umpire, these are the parameters of how to play the game. And I'm here to ensure that the rules and the boundaries of the game, boundaries of life, rules of life are followed and there's compliance. I appreciate that Jesus' peace not only guards, protects, is vigilant, and is a security guard in our hearts and minds, but Jesus' peace also, we can let it rule and be the umpire, the referee on what happens, what we allow into our hearts and what we don't allow. That we can choose to let Jesus' peace protect us as well as umpire, referee, what gets in and what we meditate on and what settles into our hearts and our minds. So I just encourage you today as we think about Jesus coming into Jerusalem, Holy Week, Palm Sunday, right? If you watched on Sunday, so much fun, celebrate Jesus. But at the same time, when Jesus came into Jerusalem, he turned it upside down because he upended the status quo, the routines, the daily stuff, expectations, all the religious norms of what was, daily practice in the temple and religious, stuff for Jerusalem. At the same time, even though there's a lot of stuff going on in our lives, political upheaval, economic uncertainty, what's happening, when we're celebrating Easter coming up on Sunday, I want to just encourage you that we let Jesus' peace rule, protect, be the umpire, and be the security guard in our hearts as well as our minds. So we don't agree with and settle into fear, uncertainty, worry, anxiety, panic, but we really let Jesus' peace rule in our hearts and our minds, as well as protect, guard our hearts and our minds. So I just want to encourage you, make sure that you join us for Good Friday. Seriously, 6 o'clock, it's going to be really amazing. Be sure that you sign up, reserve all this stuff for Easter Sunday. I love Holy Week. It's a time to celebrate the infinite power of God, but also the infinite expression of God's love to us through Jesus' resurrection. And to that end, I just encourage you, let Jesus' peace be the prevailing mindset attitude for your hearts and minds, both by protection, Jesus' peace guarding you, protecting you, as well as refereeing and umpiring what gets into your heart and mind. As kind of a stopgate and it's kind of a regulator of peace in your hearts. So thank you so much for joining. Totally stoked that you're here. Make sure you come on Sunday, bring lots of friends and neighbors, sign up. If you haven't gotten your reservation, that'd be great. And as an action point, I just leave you with a couple things as I finish. Number one, I would encourage you to receive Jesus' peace. Maybe you're watching, thinking about this, and you've had a lot of anxiety. There's all kinds of stuff with our families, with our finances, with our health, with the future, what's going on in our community, Denver, what's happening. But let Jesus' peace, receive Jesus' peace into your heart, into your minds, and make that a top priority in this Holy Week. And then I would say this as well. Let Jesus' peace vigilantly protect you. Jesus' peace wants to protect you from fear, anxiety, worry, panic, stress, stuff that's like unsettling to you. Jesus' peace exists to protect us, as well as Jesus' peace ruling in our hearts, being the umpire, being the referee. Hey, you can't do that. Hey, that's out of bounds. That's a foul. That's inappropriate. That doesn't fit with the rules that I've laid out for this existence, for this life. So let Jesus' peace rule, and let Jesus' peace protect you. Because Jesus gives us peace. And it's better than anything the world around us could give us. Anything better, certainly better than any kind of news reports or stuff that happens, when we read about things around us. Nextdoor, maybe you're on that Nextdoor app. Jesus' peace is significantly better. It's a drastic upgrade, a divine upgrade to anything that humans could offer for us. So thanks for watching. I pray that you have a overflowing, peaceful week, and that you settle into Jesus' peace, regardless of what's happening externally, that Jesus' peace on the inside would give you stability, rest, and certainty inside, no matter what's happening on the outside.